Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to our Cooperative Learning Journey webinar. We're going to give it a few minutes for everybody to join us here on Zoom. If you're coming in, thank you for joining us. We're so excited to have everybody today. We're going to just give it a few minutes for everybody to get into the Zoom, and then we'll get started here in just a second. Oh. Good morning again to everybody that's joining us. Welcome. We're so excited to have everyone here for our webinar this morning. If you're just coming in, we're gonna give everybody a few minutes to get into the chat or to get into the Zoom. We had a huge turnout. We have about 130 people registered for the webinar this morning. So we're just gonna give it until 2 or 3 minutes after to get everybody here, and we will start in just a second. We know we have a lot of TIC friends joining us this morning too, so feel free to jump into the chat, say hi, let us know your name, where you're coming from. We're going to be using the chat a lot to start to answer questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to jump in there and say hi, let us know where you're coming from this morning. All right, it's about 3 after. We've still got folks rolling into the webinar, but we're going to go ahead and get started. It is so exciting for us to be able to share this journey with you all. My name is Sarah Chester, and I'm one of the two co-executive directors at the Industrial Commons alongside Molly Hemstreet, who many of you know and love. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be able to share this adventure with you all. Just a note of housekeeping, we are recording the webinar. So you all know we're going to be sharing it out after and sharing it with folks who weren't able to make it today. So it was an absolute honor to go on this trip to Mondragon and Emilia-Romagna to learn from some of the leading cooperative ecosystems in Europe. It was a dream of ours for nearly 10 years, and we got to pull it off in the fall, and it is an honor now to share it with so many of you. And we have so many wonderful people that we need to thank. We really wanted to lean into transparency with this trip. It seemed a little crazy to take 30 people to Europe as a nonprofit, especially to my dad, apparently, who asked me, what exactly do you all do at the Industrial Commons if you're taking 30 people to Europe? But we've had a document at the Industrial Commons that we call our values. And amongst those values, alongside the words be kind and be lean and be focused, there's a phrase that says be learning. And it's something that we have valued at the Industrial Commons since our founding. And we leaned into being transparent about this trip and about the fact that we weren't just taking, the top 5 or 6 people in the organization. We wanted to take everyone. And that meant needing to have some significant resources to make the trip possible. So on the next slide, you'll see who helped us make the journey possible and allowed us to take everyone with us. So, next slide, please. These are some of the amazing organizations. There was an anonymous donor. You're here and you know who you are. And then we also had Molly has a fellowship from the Emerson Collective. The McNulty Foundation had given us some unrestricted resources. And without these generous funds, we wouldn't have been able to make this possible and take so many wonderful people from our organization and offer this to everybody in our organization. So thank you, tremendous thank you to these organizations. There's another group that we really need to thank, and these are the amazing folks, both stateside and in Europe, who planned, facilitated, coordinated, and welcomed us to their amazing communities. This trip wouldn't have been possible without all of these wonderful folks. And then the last group we want to thank are our amazing staff and also Becky from Poder Emma, our sister ecosystem up the mountain in Asheville. During a very busy time of the year, they're taking time out of their day to be here and to share our wonderful journey with you all. Thank you all so much. So our agenda for today, I'm going to pass it to Molly next, and she's going to talk a little bit about where we went and why we took this journey. And then you're going to hear directly from our staff and from Poder Emma about our key learnings, and those will be broken out into three key themes. And then we're going to go into a facilitated Q&A session. You can hold your questions till the end, but we'd also really encourage you to drop them in the chat. Don't feel like you have to hold them. You can go ahead and put them in the chat as they come up. We're going to be collecting those questions into a document and aggregating them based on topic. And so we'll try to get to as many of the questions as we can. Again, we had over 130 people register for the webinar today, so we're going to try to get to as many of the questions as we can. But if we don't get to your question and you just really want to ask it, feel free to follow up with us after, and we will be glad to answer your question. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our other co-executive director, Molly Hemstreet, and thank you all again so much for being here with us today. Molly?
Thank you, Sarah. This is part of our journey. We're going to dig right in and get started on where we went. We decided if we were going to go to the effort to get all of our staff across the ocean, we wanted to get as much out of that journey as we could. So we went to three places. We started in the Basque region of Spain. We then went into the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, and then we also went a little bit further south into the Prato region, which is the Tuscany region where Prato is. That is really the center of circularity for Europe. And so this was part of our journey, and I'm glad we did it in this way. I think often as we do these cooperative journeys, it's important that we're not over romanticizing one model or one place, but we're really trying to figure out what is resonant, not just what we can replicate. We really can't replicate these amazing places that we were able to visit, but we can find resonance. And so we were looking for that resonance and how we could bring that back to our work here in Western North Carolina. So next slide. We had three main goals of our trip. One of those was understanding the cooperative model at every level, from that worker, that member level to the firm level. What does it mean to be part of a cooperative? And then also even further than that into the networks and the ecosystems that make these incredible places, economies that can work for everyone. So we were looking at how does cooperativism work at all these different levels. We were also really interested in learning how cooperative ecosystems could stand the test of time. What does long-term impact look like, and how do we build that DNA of long-term impact into the structures and the culture of the work that we're doing here as well? So how do you encounter and create and foster the idea of generations? And then the last thing we were looking at is how do we take and borrow and learn from and find resonance to bring it back home and have that influence our work? So where did we go? Let's look at the next one, just kind of the nuts and bolts. We spent 2 days in the Basque region, starting in the Mondragon headquarters. We visited one of their industrial cooperatives, had phenomenal discussion, and it goes without saying on every slide, phenomenal food. We came back with all these pictures, and most of them were of food, so we've had to filter those down to the ones that were the part of our learning journey. But that goes without saying. It was a culinary experience as well. Then we had a phenomenal visit, learning more about Mondragon and the education through Mondragon University with our friend Fred and his team. From there, we traveled from the Basque region to the northern Italian region, and we visited Emilia-Romagna through the Bologna region. We had a visit there of a really phenomenal cooperative in the mountain region on an area called Monte Sole, where we got to know about the history and the resistance of the Italian people during World War II. We're going to hear a little bit more about that. And then in Emilia-Romagna, we started visiting more social cooperatives and what we would consider multi-stakeholder cooperatives. We visited one called Dumbo, which is really about a really interesting site on urban regeneration. We visited other social cooperatives on day 7, one called CIM, and another one that was up in the mountains that was looking at nettle nettle growth and how we were looking for fibers, natural fibers. We also then went on October 8th to Prato, to the textile innovation system there that they have. We visited their recycle and circular ecosystem, and also visited a really phenomenal textile history museum. We had a day of reflection and then we came back home. So it was a packed itinerary of getting to visit these 3 ecosystems. So, in a lot of that time while we were there, Amy Vaughn helped us lead us through a lot of reflection as we were going on. We would learn and intake, much like our food consumption. We would learn and sit down, consume a lot, and then we were trying to digest it. So, we were doing that as with our learning as much as with our bellies as well. So, we were trying to learn all along of how do we relate this work back to our work here in Western North Carolina. And there were these 3 themes that kept coming up. One was around people, place, and purpose. How did these places come to be these thriving ecosystems that they are? One was this phenomenal Basque word that we have learned called Zirimiri, which is the steady, they talk to us about the steady rain that falls across the Basque region. And if anyone from our Basque friends are here, forgive us if we don't get this correct, but just this steady ongoing rain that is around, that is similar to learning. Like, how are we always learning, and how is this learning fueling our growth and shaping the work that we're doing? And then the last learning theme came around profit and structure and solidarity. How do we really balance the idea of this business learning with business acumen with the social purpose that's going on? So what we're going to do now is really look at these 3 themes and hear from our own staff about their reflections on these themes. So the first theme that we're going to look at are people, place, and purpose. And it was just this phenomenal thought that someone said that resonated deeply with us, that no one is coming to save us. No one is going to fix our problems for us. We need to organize not from the ground up through self-help, solidarity, and into an economy that can work for everyone. And that felt very, very resonant with us here in Western North Carolina. So I'm going to turn it over to some of my friends and colleagues for them to share, really introduce who they are, what their learning was, and then a story or an illustration that they had from the journey that they would like to share for us, and then the impact that they're starting to see, how that's starting to be reflected in their work. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin Kaiser to get us started.
Thanks, Molly. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. My name's Erin Kaiser. I'm the Senior Director of Infrastructure here at the Industrial Commons, and I've been with the organization for about 5 years. So this is a really exciting trip to take. I had learned a little bit about Mondragon prior to going on the trip, so it's really compelling to get to talk to those folks and see it in person. For me, I think really from the day one, I don't think I had fully understood just how similar the parallels between Mondragon and our own organization were. So just the physical landscape driving into Mondragon on the first day, the Basque region actually feels a lot like Appalachia and where we are in the foothills here in Burke County. I think that physical parallel reinforced some of the challenges they had experienced and how they made a path to overcome them and really set up a strong economy for their own folks in their own region. So there was kind of like this thought that, the Basque region is very much like physically, culturally, and economically separated from the rest of the country. And it's not really plugged into the same economic systems that were lifting other people throughout Europe, especially after World War II. And I think they saw this and said, no one's coming to save us, but we have the tools. If we want to invest in ourselves, we can create the economic systems we want and create the culture and the life that we want. So it's really compelling to just see how they had, done that from the beginning. They were really intentional. It was not something that happened quickly per se. They invested in education, and that led to the investment of businesses. But once those businesses were established, they really made sure that they can reinforce ways to ensure their success. And I think the really beautiful thing to see was that as those businesses became successful and they were built in a really equitable and thoughtful way, then they were able to invest back into their own communities. And for them, that meant really investing in their culture, in their people. There was a lot of work preserving the language of the Basque region. And that all was like really amazing. Not having to like seek for that assistance or have other people telling you what you should be doing with your extra resources, but really understanding and knowing your own community deeply and figuring out ways to improve it and really creating, a culture where folks wanted to be. They talked a lot about, they could leave. They were skilled. They were well-educated folks. They could be successful anywhere in Europe, but they love their community and how they had built it. So it was really so compelling to see that. And I think a lot of those lessons I saw also in Emilia-Romagna and what the work they're doing in Italy. So, different takes and flavors on these conceptual ideas, but really just such a strong sort of role of self-determination and then wanting to do what's best for the folks in your own community.
Thanks so much, Erin. We had the real privilege of going on this journey, only with all our staff, but some of our really important allies up the mountain at the Poder Emma ecosystem. If you don't know about that, please do. It's some of my favorite cooperative development work happening in the United States. So I would love to turn it over now to Becky, and she's going to tell you also just briefly a little bit about Poder Emma as well, and then share some of her insights. So I'll hand it over to you, Becky.
Thanks, Molly. Hey, everybody. I'm Becky Brown, co-director of Poder Emma. And yeah, so like Molly said, I'll share a little bit about our organization. Like the Industrial Commons, Poder Emma is a place-based organization, and we're located in the Emma community of Buncombe County, which is adjacent to Asheville. And Emma is a working class, racially diverse community, but our proximity to Asheville means that we face high gentrification and displacement pressures. So our focus is really on mitigating the effects of that gentrification and displacement through strategies that include community-led development and cooperative development, cultural organizing, and mutual aid. And TIC and Poder Emma, we've been longtime collaborators, and we both focus on building cooperative ecosystems. So I don't think it's a coincidence that you have two organizations so close together that have this shared focus. Because in both organizations, the founders, including Molly and Sarah and myself and others at Poder Emma, we come from similar foundations of organizing in solidarity economics and from growing up in Appalachia. So I was born and raised in Eastern Kentucky. I've been in Asheville for over 20 years. But we've been longtime collaborators, and we were so honored to be invited on this learning journey with TIC. They invited three of our staff who are we formed the cooperative development team so that we can continue learning and building together. And one of the things that was really inspiring and affirming for me from the Basque Country, they shared how Father Arizmendi and his cohort, they organized and worked in the community for 15 years before they started the first cooperative. And I think that's part of the story that we don't often hear. We just hear about all the cooperatives. But my coworkers from Poder Emma, we looked at each other and we just smiled because that's how we started in Emma as well. There were folks organizing around quality of life issues for about 15 years before Poder Emma started. And started our focus on cooperative development because it took that amount of time to build the relationships of trust and to have some wins before we could start building something bigger together. And I think we really heard those stories and how they did this place-based organizing in the Basque Country in that region where um, like Aaron was saying, it's like people who live in a community who could go somewhere else, but they say like, no, we want to build something together here. So how do we organize together, and how do we build those relationships and make the structures that can be really strong to support this cooperative organizing. So I think to me that's like it really highlights the difference between place-based work and other kinds of work. Where in other kinds of organizations where they might have a more singular focus. Um, but I think with place-based organizing, the focus is really on what does our community need? And it becomes a more holistic approach, which is deeper work and it takes a lot more time. But out of that, like we saw what happened in these two regions of the world where now they have businesses, they have schools, they have universities, they have credit unions, they have everything they need for a thriving economy. And I think for both Jesse and for both Emma, it's like, well, that's what we believe that we can build here too. So like in Emma, we realized like, well, we need to have control of our housing to protect affordable housing. So we started forming mobile home housing cooperatives, and we needed property management maintenance for those. So we built those worker cooperatives to provide those services. And so how do we start building our own economy, but taking the lessons from these other communities and regions that have done that? And I think part of too thinking about like the connection between the history of those regions and the history of Appalachian, where they're very different histories, of course, but I think there's some similarities where um, like Appalachia does have a history of exploitation and extraction, but it also has a history of deep mutual aid, just neighbors and kin helping each other out and making sure that community members are taken care of. And I think in both Basque Country and Emilia-Romagna, they have built structures that embody their cultural values, and that's what we're trying to do at Boulder Emma too, to say how do we take these cultural values that are deeply embedded in our community, both from longtime residents as well as more recent arrivals, and how do we translate those into organizational and economic structures that are more equitable and more democratic.
Thank you so much, Becky. And I want to finish out this session with Thea because I think she has a really powerful story. I think it's going to relate to the picture that we're seeing up here around just how to struggle, both from, as Becky was saying, communities like ours in Appalachia to communities that are now calling Appalachia home through newer generations. So Thea, I'm going to turn it over to you to share a little bit about what you took away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Molly, and thank you all for being here. It's such a gift to revisit this once in a lifetime experience and trip. My name is Thea Yang. I'm the Values and Culture Director in the Industrial Commons Community Engagement field. So I co-lead our Common Ground enterprise, and I was especially excited to learn from the social cooperative models in Spain and Italy. What stood out most was just how deeply these movements were rooted in place and shared history. They weren't abstract ideas. They were born from communities that had survived war, poverty, repression, and chose to come together rather than fall apart. And they built systems grounded in solidarity, mutual aid, and long-term care for one another. So one moment that really stayed with me happened at the Historical Park in Italy. We had dinner at a cooperative restaurant and met this wonderful gentleman here in this picture. His name is Umberto. He is an Italian man in his 80s. And even though I work in community engagement myself, I caught myself thinking, he and I are so different. What could we possibly have in common? Umberto told us about growing up in the site of the 1944 Marzabotto massacre and surviving it as a child. So during dinner, I shared my family story. As former refugees and fleeing from Laos after the Vietnam and Secret Wars, starting over with nothing, and carrying so much trauma that my community still feels today. And he listened very intently and he said, one thing I'll never forget is indifference is one of the most dangerous things in times of war. And I protested the Vietnam War because we knew exactly what it felt like to be in your shoes. And in that moment, I realized how much our stories connected. This man who seemed so unlike me understood my family's pain because of his own history. It reminded me why this work matters. When people share their stories, connection becomes possible in ways we don't expect. Here in Western North Carolina and Burke County, we have our own deep history of resilience. So, manufacturing families adapting through generations, immigrant communities rebuilding their lives like me and my family, and people who instinctively show up for one another. That spirit is not so different from what we saw in Europe. So, to answer that question, I believe programs like Common Ground's Hometown Walkabout, which is our community and cultural tours, and the Old School Studio, which is our arts education, um, are places where we already see these things happening. People sharing lived experiences across racial and cultural lines, breaking down stereotypes, building real relationships with individuals and organizations and institutions out in our community, and teaching the next generation about our theory of change. That common thread always is our shared humanity. So in Mondragon and Emilia-Romagna, if they taught us anything, it's this. When communities understand who they are and who they are to each other, they can build systems like this that last. Molly?
Thank you, Thea. I think it's so neat that you and Umberto had that resonance because I think you both share this gift of talking about incredibly difficult things and painful traumas, but in a way that make it accessible to people to understand and also how we build forward. So you have that same gift that he shared with us. So thank you, Thea. We're going to move to our next theme, which is this idea of just continuous learning. While this was a learning trip we took, what we took away is just how learning happens again and again and again. Not just one training you show up for, but how do we sprinkle across everything we're doing this idea of continuous learning. So I'm going to start with Amy Vaughn. If you want to come off mute, tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about your learning and how it relates to the work that you're doing now in our ecosystem.
Sure thing. Thanks, Molly. My name is Amy Vaughn, and I have 30 years of experience in education, and I currently serve as operations manager at the Industrial Commons. And I was really drawn to this idea of Zirimiri because, as an educator, you guys can all relate to that repeated drilling of concepts and ideas that you want to get students to remember. I was interested particularly in the way that the metaphor was described, that like mist falls on the ground, saturating it after time. You can really shift an entire cultural system. And I think Americans often feel that Europe is the way it is because it's just their culture. But for me, after going through this experience, I really understood that it's a chosen direction, that it's intentional. And so two things that really stood out to me was the idea of creating intentional spaces for discussion and shared values. And one of the places that we saw this, you can see on the slide here, is in a supper club. And these beautiful clubs called chacos are places where people gather to catch up, talk through issues of the day, and reinforce their shared commitment to community and the values of it. I think the roots of this were really well described from the origins of the debate and progressive clubs that were started in the Basque Country by Arizmandera. And I think that is kind of the roots of how Zirimiri and these learnings fell so importantly in that area. While we were there in the supper club, there was a group of high school students who were singing and really enjoying their evening through face-to-face contact, which was great to see. So it was really clear that these are cultural moments and that their intention was really to hold on and, in some aspects, change the culture for a positive. The other thing that was really important that I noticed was how social co-ops meet these community needs through consistent practice. When we traveled to Italy, I was able to kind of hold on to this idea of continual practice, continual repetition of values. And I was able to see it in the CHIM cooperative that Molly mentioned earlier. As we toured that, we could really see this mission-driven practice. They bring together families, government partners, and local industries to really create meaningful work for disabled adults. They make pasta for local restaurants, label products for businesses, prepare meals for people who are experiencing homelessness, and they have a fantastic restaurant, back to the food piece, which every person that works there has a specific task and a real purpose that is supported by ongoing training with supervisors who are experts in their field. So it's a clear role for each person. And across CHIM, we saw this pattern: intentional choices, repeated consistently, building this community where everyone is valued. So we are taking that kind of idea of Zirimiri, this repeated culture. It was a wake up for us as well. How do we at TIC continue to really put our values at the forefront? How do we remind new employees this is who we are? And how do we share this broader picture with our community? So I think that's part of the work that we're going to be doing in the next few years for us. This reminder that if you do things with purpose, you can truly transform systems, as we have seen in Italy and Spain. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Our public schools were very lucky to have you for the time that you put in. And now we're very lucky to have you keeping on holding this torch of education. I'm going to pass it to Jenna, who's doing phenomenal work in our business transitions, and have her share her thoughts on this continuous learning mindset.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here, and I appreciate y'all taking a little time to recap with us. I'm Jenna Grayson. I'm the Director of Business Transitions. My role at TIC is to really handhold business owners through and workers through the process of transitioning to cooperative ownership. And so I think for me, my biggest takeaway was that I have a background in traditional economic development. I worked in business retention and in the state of West Virginia for quite a while. And I think the opportunity to kind of sprinkle cooperative concepts and ideas and democratic workplace concepts into a more traditional economic development space has been really beneficial for me, and being able to understand both sides of that work and slowly merge those concepts and allow folks to see the benefit and to understand that it's not, as I would say, folks on the team make fun of me, but I say candles and sandals. And so that was really impactful for me, being able to see the way that folks incorporated education into this long-term plan for cooperative ownership and for democratic workspaces. I think another big takeaway for me was the way that these grassroots movements, social and economic innovation that was happening, were able to impact resources and policy on a national scale. And so it didn't start where the government was saying, we should try this, let's put policy in place. It was businesses, individuals, communities banding together and saying, we've got to figure this out. We've got to change things up. And so their ability to build something new and innovative and creative, and then their national representation going, wait a second, there's something here. And then, getting on board and building out resources for that was so incredible. And I really hope that, we can see the same here in the US and North Carolina.
Thank you, Jenna. And we're gonna pass it back up the mountain to Becky and our friends at Poder Emma. They do some really phenomenal ongoing learning, particularly around popular education. I'll give it to Becky for the last word on this section. We have one more section, and I would encourage you as you're hearing things to start dropping your questions into the Q&A so we can get those organized and have ready to open and bring you into the conversation. So Becky, back up the mountain to learning mindsets.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Yeah, I really love the question that's on this slide about how do we cultivate a cooperative mindset. It's something that we talk a lot about at Boulder Emma. We talk about how do we form cooperativistas. I think it sounds better in Spanish, so I don't know. Maybe it's cooperativists. But it's really about it's how do we embody that cooperative mindset? So it's not just in our mind, it's the daily practice. That's what it says on the slide in that question is the daily practice. And so yeah, Molly, like you said, what part of our methodology is popular education and participatory action research, and both of those methodologies really prioritize continuous learning. Um, Something that really struck me thinking about the structures and how they set them up in the Mondragon cooperatives, which I think we'll hear more in the next session, maybe around how they do profit sharing and all the different structures they have set up, but they have these divisions where within the divisions, the different co-ops in that division will pool resources with each other, but they do that in ways that also are holding each other accountable and learning from each other, so that there is this continuous learning among their cooperatives. So we one of the things I really appreciate about being in relationship with TIC is that we're always looking to see like, well, where can we learn together? This trip, of course, is a great example. TIC didn't have to include Fuller Emma, but I think they understand because you all at TIC, like you all have this cooperative mindset. So it's if we can be learning alongside each other, then we can build more together than what each of our organizations could build separately. Um, and I think I was thinking too about how TSC and Boulder Emma, like we've had this collaboration for putting on what we call the ACE Institute, the Accelerating Common Economies, which supports other organizations around the country who are interested in building cooperative ecosystems. And I think the creation of ACE Institute, I think it also comes from the same question around cultivating a cooperative mindset, because we're committed to continuous learning for ourselves, but I think we also recognize our responsibility. So just like all the folks in Basque Country and in Emilia-Romagna who shared so much of their time and so much of their wisdom with us on this trip, I think we also feel that commitment to share what we're learning and any wisdom that we may have acquired with other folks who are on this cooperative journey or interested in this. So yeah, I love thinking about how we cultivate a cooperative mindset in our interpersonal relationships, within our co-ops and our organizations, in our communities, among organizations, and then even beyond our communities.
Thank you, Becky, and I appreciate you talking about ACE because our collaborations go deep across Western North Carolina. And I will say we feel like what probably Greece's Zirimiri is when we came back and we had done these, put the sticky notes on the wall. The one you couldn't see anymore was buying a really good cappuccino machine. So we feel like that was one where like there is something about the learning and the food and the education and the curation of spaces that they go hand in hand. So we've been taking that to heart. So we're going to go on to our next section because at the end of the day, these are businesses that work. We were very interested in looking at the industrial side of these. Some of the greatest products, most innovative products, research and development are coming out of these regions. They are profitable, they are well structured, they are working together across supply chains. And so, what I would like to do in this section is really dig into what we learned there. So, these ecosystems, they work because they're strong, and it's out of that strong business that they can fund this social mission. And those are structures that have been honed over generations, but they're also being honed so that they can meet future market demands. So I'm going to start with Catherine Armstrong, and I'm going to have you introduce yourself, share your learning, and see how you can apply these learnings to some of the work that we're encountering in our ecosystem now. So,
Thanks,
Catherine.
Molly.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Armstrong, and I am the program director for the Textile Innovation Engine, concentrating specifically on workforce development and engaging the next generation in the work. And it was such a privilege to be able to be a part of this trip and to learn from these amazing folks and businesses that have been doing this work for a very, very long time. And it was also a privilege to be able to think through how the cooperative model can intersect with the circular economy and how both of those can work in tandem to create new opportunities for communities. One of my biggest takeaways was how essential deep focus is to sustaining a social mission in the long term. Mondragon has remained successful for nearly a century because its cooperatives compete on fundamentals, price, quality, and service, at national and global levels. Their ecosystem is concentrated in advanced manufacturing and key industries needed in their region, and it's strengthened by institutes and universities that drive ongoing research and development. That long-term investment is what keeps their cooperatives competitive and relevant for nearly a century. Why this matters is scale and stability. Mondragon supports over 70,000 workers and maintains a no layoff policy, moving workers across cooperatives when roles change, creating deep resilience within their communities. This model is highly relevant to and reinforces the work of our Textile Innovation Engine. As a research and commercialization incubator, our impact depends on pairing innovation with real market competitiveness to sustain our ecosystem's mission for generations to come. And so that's what really resonated with me, and I'll pass it back to Molly.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. And who's in the thick of it if he's not managing a contractor in the plant? Is Bob Carswell? Let me be sure he can still come off mute. Yep, there he is. Okay, so Bob, I'm going to let you take it away. You're living this imminently day to day. So what were your
Exactly.
takeaways? Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Bob Carswell, and I'm a worker owner at Material Return, and my title is the Senior Director of Production, Research, and Development. And Material Return, if you don't know, is a cooperative circular textile manufacturing facility that's being incubated by the Industrial Commons. And it was it was a pretty emotional trip for me because when I started working with the Industrial Commons in 2019, I learned about Mondragon and Emilia-Romagna ecosystems from Molly and Sarah. This was in the very beginning. I was sitting at a lawn chair in a small little tiny office in the middle of downtown Morganton and reading white papers on these, and to get to see it, and I mean, cooperative ownership is why I came to work here at TIC. So this was very, very emotional, and it meant so much for me to be able to go on this trip. Um, and some of the learnings I had. So during the time in Mondragon community in Spain, I learned how that cooperative model drives both economic success and like social well-being together. Mondragon, it's not just a group of businesses doing their thing. It's an entire ecosystem of 70,000 workers, like Catherine said, who collaborate to support one another. These businesses all work together. And what stood out to me is how they've managed to combine innovation, competitiveness, and community protection all at once. Uh, one of the funny cultural insights I kind of learned from Fred at dinner over an awesome meal was how seriously people take work ethic in the Basque region. So I was told that the worst insult you can give someone in that region is to call them lazy. Um, and that attitude really shows up in the way that cooperatives operate. I mean, every member understands that their effort directly affects the strength of the entire region and community. And the Mondragon Corporation itself exists to support those industries within the network. Each cooperative contributes resources back into the larger organization, and in return, Mondragon provides those services, research, financing, guidance, and it's really a circular system. Companies support the corporation, and the corporation supports the companies. That structure kind of keeps that region resilient, even when economic downturns happen, when global economy shuts down for a pandemic, probably. And also how this model helps build a sustainable business environment, strong business working together and not competing harshly against each other, create this kind of economic safety net. When one cooperative struggles, the others step in. And when an innovation is needed, they collaborate. And when the community faces environmental challenges, the members themselves vote on issues that they believe need action. They then they commit to solving them collectively. And what struck me most though is that the cooperative mindset's not just theoretical; it's practiced every day, and it works. It reminded me of what we're trying to do at the Industrial Commons and the Textile Engine, and creating that regional ecosystem where businesses share those resources, workers have a voice, and long-term sustainability is built into the system. And I'll throw it back to Molly.
Thank you, Bob. That was a perfect segue to continue on the how are we building out. Again, that was one of our original learnings from the individual to the firm to the entire supply chain to the ecosystem. We were trying to build that out. So I would love to pass it over to finish out this section to Ann Wiper, who is helping to lead the innovation engine. Ann, if you could say just a little bit about that, share your takeaways, and also if you could help us dig a little bit more into this learning that we did around consortia. I'll turn
Happy
to you, Ann.
to.
Thanks, Ann.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Wiper. I am the CEO of the National Science Foundation Textile Innovation Engine, which is a pretty phenomenal program. The engines program across the US are really bringing science and technology to increase national competitiveness, national resiliency, create jobs, drive regional economic development. And our very small mission is to revitalize the textile industry centered in North Carolina. And we do that with four key pillars of work. So the first one is R&D. So obviously with being funded by the National Science Foundation, we bring science and technology to some of the challenges that the textile industry is facing. We work to commercialize new science, technology, and learnings. We have a very strong workforce development component, which you just heard from Catherine, who's been leading some incredible work in creating a whole new textile curriculum for North Carolina high school students that went they started in August, and we've got 2,500 students out there learning about sustainability, circularity, the opportunities in a modern textile industry, and then building ecosystems. So this trip to me was such an incredible opportunity because we've been building out our strategic and implementation plan for our next chunk of work. And the consortium model in particular is fundamental to creating that change that we see as pivotal to revitalizing the textile industry. So backing up from that, I wanted you to understand kind of what we're trying to do and then how do these learnings translate to that. So it was an incredible opportunity to be hands-on with all of my peers, to go visit two of the most successful cooperative and consortium-based economic systems in the world. And this learning trip really shifted how I think about collaboration, competition, and what's actually possible when groups align around shared needs. So I would say from a commercial point of view, I've grown up in an industry which is incredibly competitive. You're always trying to win, and it was a zero-sum game. And I think what I saw here was it's absolutely possible to build large-scale, highly functional, collaborative, and cooperative networks that are aligned around solving previously unsolved challenges. And these organizations are operating at scale across entire regions, competing not just at national levels, but also at global levels. So in Mondragon specifically, cooperation was definitely not a side initiative. It's their entire economic operating system. And the worker cooperatives span manufacturing, finance, education, retail, and they're all connected through shared values, mutual accountability, and individual enterprises compete in the market, but they collaborate on R&D, workforce development, capital access. I think Becky talked about that a little bit, and that has generated long-term resilience. So the result is an ecosystem designed not just for profitability, but for durability. In Emilia-Romagna, we saw a different but equally powerful model. So small to mid-sized companies organized into consortium groups that allow them to act collectively where it matters most in shared infrastructure, marketing. They really made in Italy a thing, export power, training and innovation, and but still maintaining the independence at the company level. And what those consortium groups did is they reduced risk, they had lower barriers to entry, and they allowed firms to really punch far above their individual weight globally. And then in Prato, I know Molly mentioned that. Prato is such a unique region in Italy, and it is really the birthplace of textile to textile circularity. That there we were able to see a model that's so much closer to the opportunity right in front of us. Working with Bob at Material Return, working to pull systems together and people together to solve which is what's a really big problem. So alignment didn't happen by accident. These ecosystems were intentionally designed around shared problems. Access to capital is always a big one, skilled labor, manufacturing capacity, market needs and demand. Trust was built. I think this is something we've learned over the Engine project as well. We can only move at the speed of trust. The governance was clear. Collaboration was treated as a strategic advantage, not a compromise. And when these models work well, cooperation becomes a competitive edge. And that's super fascinating coming from kind of this old school business model. It's like how do we actually make the whole system work better for everyone? So I think this challenges the assumption that fragmented systems are inevitable. I think we've been able to see where regions could align around upstream needs and build the right connective tissue and create more resilient and innovative economies that last. I think the real challenge is how do we translate that to the US, where we do have a different political approach, a different market-based, competitive, capitalist approach. And I think the time is really right to take a new approach to business. And I think our goal is really to not copy the structure in Europe, but to adopt the principle that alignment around upstream needs creates that resilience downstream. So the last little bit I'm going to talk about here is we are actually putting those learnings into action, and we are using consortium as a commercial strategy. So what we are currently doing is connecting academia, science, technology, supply chain, and demand side partners to take a new approach to how do we open up opportunities in our region and country, and how do we do that in a way that inherently de-risks a lot of those challenges? So by putting together research, technology, manufacturing capability, connecting market and supply, we're essentially de-risking kind of some of the bold goals for everyone. And so we have recently launched two consortium groups in two initial market opportunities. The first one is in textile to textile circularity, and the second one is in regenerative textile hemp. And what we are finding is that this structure will shorten development cycles, it lowers cost long term, it increases confidence across the system, it allows heritage manufacturers and new businesses to participate in growth opportunities without taking on risk individually. And so we have recently launched this work and have had kind of a phenomenal response. And it just makes me so optimistic about approaching so many of these problems in a new way and using the consortium model through cooperative action to solve problems that never could have happened before. So back to you, Molly.
Thank you, Anne. And I'm so glad you got to go on this journey with us. And I'm going to go to our next slide right before we turn it over to questions, because you're having great questions come in. So what is next? What did we take away? Anne has already talked to you about how we're launching these consortium models, which is really neat. It goes and this is where we really start to see the cooperative world and the circular worlds coming together, because the consortia that we're launching have farmers cooperatives, workers cooperatives, ESOPs, all across the supply chain, but in a collaborative way. And so we're really working on driving this model as a scaled option across the U.S., linking again the circular and the cooperative ecosystems together. We're also working on an online journal. We want, kind of in the spirit of sharing, to share our learnings, make that more available, engage in reflection as we go. So we're working with a phenomenal writer right now to create an online journal that can be more accessible as we do our own learning and get that shared out into the world. We're doing a really deep dive, thanks to our friends, particularly at the ICA group, around strengthening our governance structure. We really didn't have enough of a critical mass to really govern anything, but now as we're adding more and more people, we have enough people and we have enough really important governance decisions to make. So we're driving home and really strengthening our governance structure. We're committed to deep learning and education. Again, how do we implement things like Zirimiri? How do we go on more trips, both domestically and internationally, to bring those resonances back home? And then, as we said, we're very interested in the overlay between integrating the circular and the cooperative economy. So those are some of the things that we have next for our ecosystem. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and she's going to help us move through some questions and reflections that you all have either put in the chat or put in the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Molly, and thank you to, again, all of our team and to Becky from Poder Emma for sharing all of those amazing reflections and thoughts and feedback. This trip, has been already very impactful for our team and will continue to have impacts for years to come for all of us at TIC and Poder Emma. So we're going to switch now to a few questions. They've been coming into the chat, which is fantastic. And our team has been organizing them. Feel free to keep them coming. So just keep dropping them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. So I'm going to start with this category around learning and the cooperative mindset. We had a question around given the discussion of education, curious how when we were in Spain and Italy, education on business systems and entrepreneurship fit into the picture in both of those regions. What did we see when we were there about how they're educating folks on business systems and on entrepreneurship? And I'm going to start actually with Jenna and see if you have anything that you picked up on about what they're doing there to teach business systems and entrepreneurship. And then if
Yeah.
anybody else on our team wants to weigh in, feel free to jump in.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I think right off the bat, I immediately think of Mondragon University. So having a education partner that is so deeply steeped and well versed in those cooperative models and understandings is really incredible. And so I think having that resource is huge. One of the other things that I really it could be a potential North Star for some of our work. Something that I really appreciate about Mondragon and Emilia-Romagna was their systems that they have in place so that when workers are considering ownership or moving into ownership, there are resources available to them that allow them to think like an entrepreneur, to think like a business owner. And so ensuring that they have, greater financial chops and a better understanding of what it means to be a business owner, whether that's personal relationships, leadership. And so I think those systems and models that they built out are really incredible. And I would love to see more of that for our team. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And we also spent our first day at the training center for Mondragon and learned a little bit about the training that Mondragon does, Mondragon Corporation does with all of their worker owners, which was really neat to be in that space, which is some of those pictures were in the PowerPoint. It's this amazing 15th century building. It, felt like this just kind of place that people are called to on the mountainside, where worker owners receive their training as they become part of Mondragon. So that was a really neat place to be. And I think, a lot of that training on business systems and entrepreneurship is kind of baked into the training that they receive also as worker owners. Anybody else on our team want to share on that question? If
Sarah,
not, I'll move on.
I'll just throw in Ander just added resources from Mondragon. So and yeah,
Great.
I appreciate you throwing that in there, Andrew. I didn't want to call y'all out, but yeah, they have really fabulous and incredible tools and getting to see like it's a requirement to go and learn. And so, it's so often we put learning on the back burner, I think. And I do that sometimes myself. And so having like creating a space that like Sarah said, is so beautiful and so comforting and warm. I think that's really incredible to say, like, well, you have to go do this, you have to improve, you have to learn, and you're gonna go do it in this really beautiful and incredible space. And so, yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
All right. Um, I'm going to start this one with Aaron Kaiser and then see what others have to add. Um, this was a really interesting topic for us. Are there things that co-ops can do in the EU that might be harder to do in the USA due to policy and regulation? Aaron, you've been with us for a long time and have gotten pretty steeped in all things cooperatives, and we did talk a lot about this and learned a lot about it when we were at the University of Bologna, in particular from two professors there. So, do you want to take a stab at this one, Aaron, and then we'll see if anybody else on the team wants to add in.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to jump in. Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things, especially in Italy, was that there are formal legal rules around if you are organizing your business as a cooperative. There's like some specific obligations you have for your finances that help ensure, both a return and the investment in the business, but also into the cooperative ecosystem structure, and how those returns also get then passed on to their respective employees and owners and members. But I think one of the really compelling things about that we learned on that trip, though, was that those do not dictate the success of the businesses that are cooperatives, right? Like those were policies that the cooperatives that were formed fought for to establish as legal norms. And so they really drove that policy, and that helped future and additional cooperatives get formed and be sustainable over the long term. So I think that was really compelling. I think sometimes it's easy for us to think like, well, we don't have the same supportive policy structures, but it was great to hear firsthand how they really pushed to make those possible and to make those happen.
Great. Anybody else on the team want to add to that? All right. We've got a question here from Kate at CCI. Um, Molly, I might start with you on this one. Curious if you all reflected on cooperatives as a business strategy and cooperatives as a solidarity and social cohesion strategy. How do these approaches differ and how do they overlap?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what was so neat across all of these ecosystems is to think about how cooperativism like shows up. How does it show up in a producer's cooperative? How does it show up in a worker-owned cooperative? How does it show up in an industrial cooperative? How does it show up in a network? How does it show up when people are taking over buildings to bring them up back into like back online? So what was so nice, another really interesting way we saw cooperatives show up in Italy is in these rural places that are being kind of there's not population gain. There are these community cooperatives where people are going back in to bring these communities back online. So they're receiving support from the EU in order to create these cooperatives. So I think what we get to see is ones that are purely have a social mission, ones that really are they're creating widgets, they're building an industry, and then there's this movement in the middle. And so what was so nice is I think sometimes in the US we tend to think about cooperatives just like in one or two silos, and we were able to see a whole economy that was applying cooperativism. So I think it can appeal, and that's what I loved what Jenna said, and I love what Anne said too. I love that their perspectives are coming from like corporate America and coming from economic development, that this is a way to de-risk really good business opportunities, and for us to also say cooperatives are a way to solve social problems. Now, that's not to say cooperatives are the silver bullet for everything. We might feel that way sometimes. I know I feel that way sometimes, but I think what we were able to do is just have our perspective opened up a little bit more to see cooperativism as a way of solving more social problems.
Great. All right, I'm going to throw this one to Anne. It's a two-parter. Get ready. How are you how are you expanding your consortium spheres of influence? Where can we learn more about structures and rules regarding consortia? And this is from Rick, who's specifically interested in food systems. So any advice for him about how consortia might apply to food systems?
Well, it's interesting because we did quite a bit of research on consortium models and models that can work to connect supply and demand. And it's interesting because the best examples were in the food world. So we looked at Ocean Spray to look at how they were organized. We looked at, I think it was Horizon Dairy and Molly. I think we had one more that I'm not thinking of. There was one in the textile space, but it it definitely opened the door to how do we think differently about it. And I think so to me, there's an absolutely logical progression and a legal structure with agricultural cooperatives that could then connect into the food world. I think the second part of the question, remind me again, Sarah, is it how do we get beyond kind of the starting work?
Yeah, how are you expanding your consortium spheres of influence?
Well, I will say we are just starting in this work. So expanding doesn't feel like the priority now. Establishing feels like the priority. And our goal was to make sure that from farmers or supply chain processors to the brands that we have connected with, that they are all groups that have a history of innovation, values, and demonstrated action in solving big challenges. And so to me, we build the proof of concept. We learn from the actions we're taking now. They're all well researched, but this has never been done before, the way we're trying to do it. And then once we complete a couple of introduction cycles with this group, then we expand because you've got to do it right in a smaller scale first, take those learnings and then expand it to a much bigger scale approach. So I hope I'm happy to answer any more specific questions, but I think understanding that we are at the beginning phase of building something that is, we've learned, we've adapted, we're learning every day. I've got a meeting this afternoon with a big group to ask the questions so that we can formulate the right approach for how we move forward. So very much a learning exercise right now.
Great. Thank you, Anne. I see that someone had asked a question about a short introduction to TIC's history. We've only got a few minutes left for questions, so I'd really encourage you to go to our website. There's a fabulous mini documentary that we have there on the website, and it's got a great overview of our story and history and how our organization came together based on our assets here in Morganton of the textile industry to work on rebuilding our economy. So I'll direct you there to our website. And then this might be our last question. We'll see if we can fit in one more. What type of infrastructure are you building to ensure regenerative efforts and operational excellence in the cooperative space? That's a big one. It depends on which enterprise you're talking to and who you're asking. But I want to make sure that we get Put or Emma in there. So, Becky, I'm going to pass this one to you. How do you ensure operational excellence in the cooperative space? You all are always thinking about governance and how to make that work at Put or Emma. So, what would you have to say there?
Yeah, like you said, those are really big questions. I think on the infrastructure side, we have really focused on, like I said, the mobile home housing cooperative, saying like how can we permanently protect affordable housing in our community through mobile home cooperatives. So we also have some real estate that is owned cooperatively. Again, protecting as much as we can, saying, if we can own the assets, then, our community is much more protected from the effects of gentrification and displacement. On the operational side, yes, we do a lot. We do a lot of work with governance and decision making. I think one of the things that was inspiring for us from this trip. Was in Mondragon, hearing about how they have these social committees to socialize a lot of the decisions that are going to be coming up in the general assemblies that they have. And so we actually took that back. We're getting ready to have our the general assembly meeting for our real estate cooperative that owns two commercial buildings and a community park that we operate. And we have some decisions coming up about that. And we're like, oh, great, let's implement this idea that we learned of having small, kind of pre-meetings and talking with folks ahead of the General Assembly so that people have more information, because we know that, the creation of knowledge and shared knowledge and understanding is so important when it comes to decision making, so that people are really coming to assembly or governance spaces collectively when we're coming together, that we're prepared with the right information to be able to make decisions, to have informed decisions. So we had these pre-meetings that went really well, and it was really exciting to like immediately be able to implement one of our learnings from Mondragon.
Great. Thank you so much, Becky. All right. Well, I wish we could ask the rest of the questions. Unfortunately, we're going to have to move on. But thank you all so much for all the great input that you've shared here, and for all your great questions. We will be sharing out the transcript and the recording for those of you who are asking about that. We'll be sure to get that out to everyone. Just a few next steps here. I think Molly, you're gonna wrap us up on the next steps.
Sure, just very quickly here. Thank you, Sarah, and for all your questions. It keeps the thinking and the Zirimiri going. So if you have more, if you want more information, Sarah Crisp has done a phenomenal job looking at reflections, photos. There'll be a video from our phenomenal videographer and photographer, Franzu, that went with us. So check those out. And then just on our final slide, we want to thank you for being part of our journey as we go along. If you want more information about the Industrial Commons, feel free to look at that. There's more information about the Textile Innovation Engine, and also be sure you check out the ecosystem of Poder Emma. So thank you for being on this journey of the hour and 15 minutes with us today, and we hope you all have just a wonderful and warm and safe into this year and beginning of the next. So thank you.